Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to this 14th edition in EVPA's policy webinar series. Today's webinar is about InvestEU, what's in it for venture philanthropists and social investors. My name is Bennett Bart. I am part of EVPA's policy and public affairs team, and I will host you in today's session. Before we start, I would like to address a few technical notes regarding the webinar. The GoToWebinar application allows you to access the webinar via your computer or your phone. Throughout the webinar, you will be able to open or hide the GoToWebinar control panel. Note that the control panel automatically collapses when it's not used, but you can bring it back using the orange arrow on the left. In the Join Audio section of the control panel, you should tick the option Microphone and Speakers if you're joining the webinar through your computer. If you would like to dial in using your telephone, choose telephone and provide the PIN code that you received when you registered for the webinar, or that you can also see here on the screen in the second bullet. If you happen to have any technical issues, then please don't hesitate to get in touch with EVPA and speak to my colleague Gianluca, whose phone number you can also see here on the screen. During the webinar, you will be able to raise your questions and feedback in writing through the question section in the application. Again, should you have any technical issues, you can also reach out to us in the question section. The last part of today's webinar will consist of an interactive Q&A session in which we will address your questions to the panelists. If you would like to ask a question to one specific speaker, make sure you also include whom you would like to address with your question. In case we cannot answer all of your questions, of course, please feel free to contact EVPA and get in touch with us, and we will follow up accordingly after the session. Finally, I need to mention that the session will also be recorded and uploaded to EVPA's website in due time. Before we dive into the topic of today, I'd like to spend a minute or so to introduce you EVPA, the European Venture Philanthropy Association. EVPA is a membership organization that currently gathers around 280 members from across Europe that are interested or active in the field of venture philanthropy and social investment. Our members include foundations, social investors and financial institutions, academics, as well as social service providers. One of EVPA's objectives within our mission to build a well-functioning and cohesive ecosystem for social investment and social innovation is to foster conducive policy environments both at European and national level. EVPA's policy and public affairs work consists of two main pillars. First, in our role as thought leader, we act as a counterpart for the institutions of the European Union by being the voice of the sector, communicating the concerns and expectations of our members to European policymakers. Doing so, we lead the discussion and shape the debate. We also spot and discuss key topics of interest to our sector, including relevant initiatives undertaken by the European Union. Second, in our role as catalyst, we bring different actors together in conversation and collaboration in order to increase mutual understanding, shared value, and impact. We carry out initiatives that tap into the synergies between the public and private sector and showcase best policy practices and inspirational success stories from our sector. We aim to inform, initiate interactions, and inspire. One of our projects here at the Policies and Public Affairs Department is the EU webinar series. The EU webinar series started in mid-2014 and has reached already more than 1,000 people. We aim to connect practitioners and those interested in the field with policymakers and discuss relevant policy topics and initiatives. As you can see from this list, previous webinars have addressed issues such as outcome funds, regulation for social investment funds, and many more. All of these webinars are published on EVPA's website and readily available if you happen to be interested in watching or rewatching the recordings on specific topics. At the end of the webinar today, a quick survey will pop up on your screen. We would greatly appreciate it if you could take a minute or so to share your feedback to today's session, as well as to leave your suggestions for future webinars that we will have next year. Today's topic is InvestEU. What's in it for venture the main components of the European Union's 2021 to 2027. Now, the multi-annual financial frameworks provide a stable basis for implementing EU budgets for a period of at least 5 years. The EU budgets complement national budgets of member states by funding initiatives and policies within European value added. The multi-annual financial frameworks allow the European Union to focus on common policies over a period that is long enough to make sure that the intervention is effective. This long-term vision is important for potential beneficiaries of EU funds, co-financing authorities, as well as national treasuries. The current multi-annual financial framework covers the period 2014 to 2020 and allows the European Union to invest around €1 trillion over that period. By defining in which areas the EU invests more or less over a period of 7 years, the multi-annual financial framework is an expression of political priorities, which of course include social, societal, and environmental elements. As a result, the adoption of multi-annual financial frameworks is an important moment for specifically these reasons. One, it dictates the way forward in the European Union for a significant period of time. It outlines how much budget is allocated to the social innovation and social entrepreneurship window. And third, the multi-annual financial framework defines the instruments in which way the budget will be deployed. As a result, it is very important to discuss the multi-annual financial frameworks in an open way between policymakers and practitioners in order to make sure that budgets are spent where they are most needed and instruments add value to the sector. As we speak today, the European Commission is working on a proposal for the new multi-annual financial framework for the period 2021 to 2027. It is a critical point in time to take a closer look at the multi-annual financial framework to understand its progress and to discuss the opportunities and challenges the new framework holds for the social investment and venture philanthropy sector. For today's webinar, we've invited two great speakers that will both present their view towards the EU budgets and the proposed instruments from two very different perspectives. Excuse me. Bernardo Urrutia is a financial specialist at the European Commission's Directorate for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. Bernardo and his team are working on developing the budgets and instruments specifically for the social innovation and social entrepreneurship window of the multi-annual financial framework. Bernardo will introduce the framework for the next period from an institutional perspective and zoom into the two central elements of the social window, InvestEU and the European Social Fund Plus. Dr. Markus Freiberg is the managing director of FASE, the financing agency for social entrepreneurship in Germany, and a long-term knowledge and expertise partner for social investment and venture philanthropy in Europe. Markus will introduce FASE and share his understanding of the social investment market in Germany and in Europe. Markus Freiberg will provide some food for thought towards, towards how European funds could support the social investment and venture philanthropy sector, building on his great deal of experience in this field. Bernardo and Markus, I'd like to thank you both for taking the time today and a very warm welcome on behalf of EVPA. Inviting Bernardo and Markus to this webinar today hopefully sparks a fruitful discussion between European institutions and practitioners on the ground. Without further ado, I suggest we get right to it. Coming up, Bernardo will introduce InvestEU as part of the multi-annual financial framework for the period 2021 and 2027. After Bernardo's overview, Markus will complement with his practitioner's perspective that will change in the next period with new instruments in place. As I've already mentioned, we will have a slot for both Markus and Bernardo to react to any feedback and questions we receive in the end of the session. Throughout the webinar, please send us your questions in writing and we'll make sure to address them to the right person according to whoever you would like to ask the question to. Bernardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bennett. Hello, Markus and everyone. I am Bernardo Urrutia. I am working for the Commission and I will present in this webinar the point of view of the Commission services. very important for me is to ask you something at the very beginning. All along the presentation, I need to ask you to have three very important elements in mind. The first is that what I'm going to present is a proposal. It's a proposal of the European Commission that has to be approved by the European Parliament and by Council. So we are not yet at the final stage. We need to see what will be the final decision of the co-legislator. The second very important element to take into account is that the Commission is making a proposal to cover years 2021, 2027. That means 10 years' time. And we know it's very difficult to foresee or to advance what will happen in the future. The challenge for us is to propose something that will allow us to act in the future. We need to be smart enough to have the resources, the capacities, the instruments that we need to address the challenges in the future. So it's a bit of strategic thinking, and I think this strategic thinking will have to be developed in the coming months, in the coming weeks with many of you. And the third element before starting the presentation is also to stress something that is very important for us in the Commission. That, I mean, financial instruments are financial instruments. The budget is also an instrument. But what is very, very important for us is what we want to achieve with these instruments. It's the policy objectives. And here we talk about the social dimension of the European Union, the social investment markets, and all the impact that we have to ensure from that point of view. So budget, financial instruments are very important, but we need to have in mind what we want to achieve. Now, to go to the future, to 2021, 2027, I need to refer a bit to the past. So we have to know where are we coming from. I will start from 2011, 7 years ago, with the Social Business Initiative. You remember, was the time after the financial crisis, and for the first time, the Commission made a proposal, recognition of the importance of the social sector, of the social enterprises, of the venture, of the philanthropy, of the donors, and we highlight the need to improve the access to finance, to give much more visibility to this sector, and also to improve the regulatory environment. That was 2011. 3 years after 2011, European Parliament and Council approved the Employment and Social Innovation Programme. And for the first time, we have a budget. We have a budget to implement on microfinance for social purposes and for social enterprises. That was in 2014, and since then we have been working with our partners, the European Investment Fund and the European Investment Bank, in order to implement financial instruments in the social sector. Things were progressing, and we saw that the budget that was allocated to us was being used and absorbed. And in 2016, we have a new policy recall about the importance of supporting startups and scale-up initiatives, always coming to the same subjects: how to improve access to finance, how to improve framework conditions, how to be open to new technologies and business models, and also how to ensure international cooperation, not only the EU, but also neighboring countries and so on. What we have achieved since 2014 when the EASI program was approved? Well, we are in a situation now in 2018 where practically all the budget that was allocated to us has been used on microfinance and on social enterprises. We have put in place a number of instruments. Maybe with the next slide I can present that. And you will see that we have financial instruments, but we have also grants and subsidies. On the financial instrument side, we have developed the EASI warranty, which is providing a warranty from the European Union, in particular for microfinance sector. We have also a capacity building instrument, which is equity participations in social enterprises. As the demand of the market was strong, we have also obtained support from the European Fund for Strategic Investment, the Juncker investment plans for Europe, having also support for equity and social impact. And now we are working on a new instrument, EASI funded instruments, that we expect to put in place in the coming months. On the side of grants, we have been also active. We have been providing a number of support to projects in the form of transaction costs, which is simply when you have a project and you need a small amount of a grant in order to ensure investment grade, we can intervene if the project is good enough, following a call for tenders, we provide you the support. We have been also providing a number of operating grants to support EU-wide networks. And the idea has been always that it's not only enough to have financial instruments, it's very important to develop the market in terms of demand and in terms of supply of finance. Figures, you will find figures of what we have achieved in our website, in the Commission, and also in the website of the European Investment Fund. I think up to now, in less than 3 years, with a relatively small amount of budget, we have generated around 1.8 billion in social finance in Europe. Of course, 1.8 billion in 3 years is significant. It's not so big when you consider the size of financial market, but we have seen that the market is growing, and this is a very important factor to take into account for the future. It's not only that we have achieved a volume of social finance, it's also that we are learning lessons. We are learning lessons about what are the things that we have to improve at the European Union level. How has been the geographical coverage of our instruments? What have been the conditions that we are offering to final recipients? How has been our cooperation with the philanthropy and donor sectors? There are many questions that we have to have now in mind in order to prepare the future. And now I come to what is the subject of this webinar, is the preparation of the next period. To start with, you know what is the multi-annual financial framework that the Commission has to propose to the Member States and to the Parliament. It's an instrument that we propose how much money each Member State will have to contribute to the budget of the European Union. It's not only how much money each Member State will have to contribute, it's what are the main spending priorities, what we are going to propose, what we want to do with the budget that we are going to have. And this time has been a very difficult, or it's been a very difficult moment, because for the first time we will have a union of 27 Member States, not anymore 28. And it's a lot of discussions. What are the priorities that we have to support in the European Union? Should we maintain the level of expenditure? Should we reduce? What will be the policy areas? And our President Juncker, in May 2018 this year, took the decision, which for us makes a lot of sense, to maintain our level of our capacities and to reinforce the resources allocated for social Europe. You will find all the elements in our website about the new priorities for the next period. The thing is that we propose a fundamental and significant change in respect of the past. So what we are going to prepare is something that you can expect a lot of changes, and we try to improve in aspects related to simplification, because some people say whatever instruments we are proposing, there are too many of them, it's a bit too complicated to understand, people have difficulties to say to whom do they have addressed. So a very important aspect is simplification, and another very important aspect is we have to focus on results. We want to have good value with social value for money. So in the next slide, you will see the big picture. This picture is all the budget of the European Union. Here you have all the priorities. Priorities on research, priorities on space policy, priorities on agriculture, priorities on cohesion, external action, defense, migration. So it's very important to see that there are many competing priorities for the budget of the European Union. And my colleagues in the different departments of the Commission, they will argue with good reasons that they have very important projects. So we, in our side, we have also to defend social Europe. And this is something that I will ask you, all of you also, to have that in mind, that whenever we discuss the budget, we are always competing with other priorities. From this big picture, I have highlighted two. One is point 7, and this is the heading about investing in people, social cohesion and values. And this will be the new European Social Fund Plus. This will be the main instrument for our social policy. On top of that, I have also highlighted in point 2, European strategic investments, the program InvestEU, which will have also for the first time a very important role mobilizing social finance for Europe. So we can go to the following slide. The European Social Fund Plus. In this Social Fund Plus, we will merge the Youth Employment Initiative, the European Aid for the Most Deprived, and the EASI program. The key elements on the Commission proposal is that we want to implement this new instrument, but according to a strong monitoring of policy priorities and implementation. So in the Commission proposal, we are going to propose to link the way that we spend the monies of the social fund to the process identified in the European semester. You know that the European semester is every 6 months, the Commission discusses with every member state a number of recommendations. And where we see problems in a team spirit, we say, okay, this particular member state, you should provide priority to this particular sector. Maybe it's education of young people, maybe is integration of people with difficulties that comes to your member state and so on. But we need to go hand by hand with member states telling how we make progress on the social field. Also, a requirement is that for those member states that have a serious problem with young people that is not in studies, have no prospect for employment, we want them to make a much more effort to giving new opportunities to young people to integrate in the labor markets, to integrate in society. And then also very important change is that we want to have 25% of the European Social Fund funding on measures fostering social inclusion and targeting those most in need. We provide flexibility in the Commission proposal in the sense that the European Social Fund Plus can be combined with other instruments. We can use resources to support, for example, Erasmus or the Migration Fund or the Asylum Fund, but we can also support the InvestEU, and this is something I will come later. Now, in the next slide, the amount proposed for the European Social Fund Plus is 101.2 billion. It's significant. It's a big effort in respect of the previous period. You know that the European Social Fund is always implemented in partnership with member states. So we need to start negotiations with member states. What are the operational programs that will be implemented in each member state addressing what priorities? And this process will start as soon as we have the approval of the basic test by European Parliament and Council. We also, as I have said, foresee much more flexibility, and what is very important for us, the possibility of combining grants of the European Social Fund with InvestEU, and the possibility for member states to contribute to InvestEU to boost social finance and social investments. So now in the next slide, I start already talking about the InvestEU. InvestEU, the basic idea is to use a budgetary guarantee of the EU budget supporting financial transactions. The EU budget guarantee can or should provide to the final recipients the best possible conditions in financing Europe. We need this instrument to support projects that can generate revenues, that have business sustainability. We will use this element in a smart way, combining grants with financial instruments. We will look complementarity between actions in the different member states and at member states level. And insofar as we can, we will ensure to everybody simplification and flexibility. So in the next slide, you will see that what we are proposing is very open in the sense that we want to have all possible financial instruments available to use in innovative manners. It's all the capital market instruments, credit enhancements, equities, warranties, loans, participation in investment platform of funds, subordinated debt, be very open to new possibilities that technology offers about crowdfunding and so on. But all these possibilities that we will have to be precise and define what are the particular products, how we are going to do that. InvestEU covers 4 different areas. The first is infrastructure, which is basically energy, transport, and telecommunications. The second one is research, innovation, and digitalization. The third one, small and medium enterprises, and for the first time, we will have a whole window dedicated to social investments and skills. So if we go now to the following slide, you will see the amount of the budget guarantee. And in our case, social investment and skill, we propose a budget guarantee of 4 billion. 4 billion on budget guarantee can be translated in an enormous amount of social investments for Europe. Our estimates is that we can achieve 50 billion, which is a lot of resources. But of course, very important to have in mind that this is the budgetary possibilities. In order to achieve all that, we need to have in place the right instruments in the market. Maybe some member states will have to make structural reforms. Maybe we have to improve the regulatory framework. Maybe we have to make a much more effort on capacity building. All this has to be examined. The thing here is that if we are successful with our measures, we will have the resources to implement it. And it's not only a budgetary guarantee, it's also we are proposing a significant budget in terms of technical assistance for project promoters, for capacity building, to help people that have good projects but maybe are not so expert on finance, how to do it. And in full partnership with many of you, in full partnership with member states, in full partnership with our implementing partners. Now, the next slide is a bit long, but I feel important to put it for your knowledge. This is in the regulation. And you see, until now, we have been focusing on microfinance and social enterprises, point A. With InvestEU, you see the expansion. We are going to support programs related to human capital and education and skill. Very important. For the first time, we propose to support social infrastructures, which means social housing, hospitals, schools, universities, whatsoever, insofar we see that this is needed. We support also social innovation with a broad mind. I mean, we have to see what are the social impacts of the different projects. We have included for the first time support to cultural activities with social goals, integration of vulnerable people, including third country nationals, innovative health solutions, inclusion and accessibility of persons with disabilities. We are very ambitious. All this is in the regulation, will be EU acquis, will be EU law. But this is just a starting point, because to translate all that into reality, we need to work very hard. Now, in the last slide, I will present, this is in the Commission communication. As I have said, all this is now in discussion in the Council, is in discussion in the Parliament, so all this can change. What we have trying to propose is a kind of straightforward process. One innovator, one promoter has a project. The project can be presented to one implementing partner, which will be, I mean, for the most time, the European Investment Fund or the investment group, maybe also other implementing partners. We have to examine what is the technical assistance needs. We have to examine if a component of grant is needed or not. And insofar this project is robust and solid, we present that for approval. The role of the Commission will be always to check the verification with EU policy objectives. What we call social has to be social. We have to ensure that we focus on social impact, nothing else. I mean, there are other windows and there are other instruments for other purposes. In the social window, we are social. Then will be a kind of technical review on financial parameters and additionality, and an investment committee decision with also an approval of the implementing partners. We try to ensure that from the time that the project is submitted to the moment that the project is running is as short as possible. We are basing ourselves on all the lessons that we have learned until now, because it has taken a lot of time putting in place instruments. Now we can take advantage of what we know. And yeah, my last slide, this is the real one, is a call to all of you, because first, the final configuration depends on the decisions of Parliament and Council, and discussions are ongoing. The next years, I mean, as of next year, which is in 3 weeks' time, 2019, and 2020, we will need to put in place a lot of preparatory work, and that we will need a lot of consultation with key actors, including many of you. Our challenge is to have everything what I have explained ready for operation on the 1st January 2021. And we have to work under stress, because it's not so much. We have to consult many people, many actors. We have to consider all possibilities. So I will end here my presentation. asking you to be very attentive to all the possibilities that you will have to interact with EVPA, with all the actors, member states authorities, how we succeed in this collective challenge. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernardo, for this detailed overview over the multi-annual financial framework and specifically InvestEU and the European Social Fund Plus. I think the call to action is a very nice point for everyone in the audience listening to this. And I, at this point, would just like to remind you that you have the opportunity to start the discussion right here, right now, by posting your questions in the questions section. And we will be very glad to have your questions in the end of the session in order to get this conversation going with Bernardo and also Marcus. So clearly, both InvestEU as well as the improved European Social Fund are promising proposals that could be very beneficial to the social investment and venture philanthropy sector. Marcus, I'm very happy to pass over to you and learn about your view on the new framework agreement from a practitioner's perspective on the ground. Stage is yours.
Dear Bennett, thanks so much for handing the word over, and dear Bernardo, thanks so much for presenting the detailed plans what the EU is planning for the InvestEU. So before I start with the presentation, I will briefly introduce myself. So my name is Markus Freiburg, and I'm the co-founder and managing director of the financing agency of social entrepreneurship in Germany. We basically, we are a spin-off of Ashoka, and we support the social enterprises in raising hybrid growth capital. So basically the capital that they need to scale their business models with social impact. And in that context, we have been have a quite good understanding of the market and the financing needs of the social enterprises, and also have gained some experience in the collaboration with the European Commission and the financial instruments. And so within the next around 10 minutes, I would love to present you a brief overview of what we are doing with FASE, also to explain a bit how we see the financing needs in the market, and then B, articulate some food for thought on what important elements on the InvestEU could be. But before I go into the details, I would like to take the opportunity to thank also Bernardo and the European Commission for all the efforts that they are doing in this field to support social innovation and also social enterprise finance, which I think is really pioneering work that the Commission is doing in that field, and very important to provide the necessary financing. And unfortunately, we don't see many member states that are acting in such an innovative and supportive way as the Commission is doing. And yeah, I think it's also an important point to thank them for the activation. But first, to briefly explain what are we doing with FASE, the financing agency for social entrepreneurship. It basically is that we want to build bridges between social enterprises and impact investors. So social enterprises are usually enterprises that try to tackle a societal challenge with entrepreneurial means, and on that way, they often need some support in developing their business model to reach a certain level of investment readiness, and we really help them as a corporate finance advisor to identify potential investors, identify the appropriate way of financing their further scale up, and also then really help them through the whole process from structuring the deal, approaching investors, and building a deal-by-deal syndication. And on the other hand, impact investors are people that are looking to invest money, but also to looking for a social return. And we manage to provide these investors with an open pipeline of investment-ready social enterprises, and try to really customize the deal suggestions to their specific needs, and provide them with a professional deal support. As you can see on the next slide, in the past 5 years, we have supported more than 40 social enterprises in raising more than 20 million euros. These enterprises so far have been mainly in Germany, Austria, and the Benelux region. And what you can see from the sector split on the left-hand side of the slide, that the sector split is quite diverse, ranging from education, energy solutions, health, inclusion, and other models. And what you see on the x-axis is also that we see different, let's say, operating models of social enterprises, which we think is quite typical for the market. So on the one hand side, what you see here on the left we see many social enterprises that operate in a hybrid way. So combining for-profit and non-profit elements, where you need mezzanine, which is a specific form of financing, something that is rated between equity and debt, and that can be paid back by the cash flows of the social enterprise. And on the other side, you see a more classical social startup profit with purpose businesses, where you can also operate with equity. So I think it's clear that there are different financing needs in the market. And I think it's important that InvestEU suggestions also can address these financing needs. Last word from towards FASA. Now we also got another support from the European Commission to expand our activities to further European countries, and really want to build a pan-European pipeline of investment-ready social enterprises, mainly for two reasons. One, also to encourage social enterprises to think repayable financial instruments as one part of their, let's say, toolbox. On the other hand, also to inspire impact investors to consider investments into social enterprises as an important alternative, just to, let's say, consider impact as an important dimension next to return risk and liquidity. But if you go to the next slide, so what are really the main concerns that we are seeing in the market, and the main challenges of social enterprises that we think should be addressed by InvestEU and other policy measures? Basically two challenges. So the first challenge is that we see that many social enterprises actually operate with hybrid model. So it means they combine for-profit and non-profit elements within their business models. And with this, they don't fit into the traditional types of funding that are available in the market. Because what we have learned with many talks of different investors and philanthropists is really there seem to be two dominant mental models in the market that are not, let's say, connected. So on the one hand side, you have a non-profit logic that is actually looking for a minus 100% rate of return. So actually for a grant that you forgive as a very short-term horizon. And on the other hand, you have a commercial focus that is more on the investment focus, looking for market rates of return. And exit option refers to very, let's say, attractive sale of the equity position afterwards. And what we see is that many social enterprises fall between these two extremes and are more hybrid from their character, offer only moderate rates of return, have fewer exit opportunities, and that it really requires a very customized financing approach to find an appropriate financing model for individual social enterprises. And what could it be? Could, for example, be then really that you set up a model where maybe the non-profit organization, let's say, invents an idea and fosters a further penetration of that idea, and the for-profit entity actually, let's say, sells products and services in the market. One example, for example, could be Discovering Hands. Frank Hoffmann, it's an Ashoka fellow from Germany, and they train blind women to detect breast cancer because of their superior tactile senses. They are in a better position to detect breast cancer. So this is really one challenge that we see quite often in the market people are struggling with. And if you go to the next slide, you see that this is often combined with an early stage financing gap that we see in the market. It's also called Death Valley or missing middle in the literature. And it mainly applies to a financing gap in the area between 100 and, let's say, 500,000 euros, where it's often after an initial proof of concept, the financing need is still too large for a pure philanthropist perspective, but on the other side, too small and risky for more institutional social investors. And where we think are more, let's say, hybrid combinations necessary of philanthropic or public capital on the one hand side and impact first investment on the other side. Because what we really see in the market is that the majority of the investors are actually waiting at the end of the pipeline. So each and everybody wants to invest in social enterprises that are around for 10 years, have already revenues of 1 million or more, and that already generate a surplus, are cash positive. But the challenge is there are not so many of these social enterprises across Europe, and it's really important to build the early stage the pipeline from the beginning on. And that's actually the reason why we think that InvestEU is also so important to support this development. And if you go to the next slide, just in terms of what should be the ambition level, we think that InvestEU and together with ESF Plus would be really a tremendous opportunity to strive for a single European market of social innovation, which could really help to establish also the economic prosperity of Europe and accompany the single European market for products and services. Because what we see is that especially in the innovation field, the markets are still very fragmented. And if you just take, for example, the investments of the members of the EVPA, so the venture philanthropists and social investments, less of 10% of them are actually cross-border between individual countries. And there are not so many social enterprises, on the other hand, that really brought it to a European scale. And also in the Ashoka portfolio, very few examples that brought it really to large scale, like Wikipedia, for example. The founder, Jimmy Wales, and I'm sure you know Wikipedia, that's really a good example of a social enterprises that changed the way how we organize knowledge. And I think there's a lot of more potential to support also these kind of social ventures across Europe. And we hope that InvestEU and ESF Plus could make a very, let's say, specific contribution to that, to building this single European market of social innovation. So how could that look like specifically? 5 points I want to briefly touch on, as 3 are referring more to the, let's say, investment side, and 2 on the impact side. So if we start with the investment side, the first point, the mobilization of capital, would address actually the supply of financing for social enterprises. So we believe that InvestEU should play an important role to leverage actually more private capital into the social enterprise finance sector, basically via the de-risking of social enterprise funding. So how could that look like? So as Bernardo mentioned, there are already easy guarantees in place that can be used for mezzanine or debt types of financing for social enterprises. We would suggest to complement that also with, let's say, guarantees that can be used for equity financing, which I think is also another important element of financing for social enterprises. Or it could also be used as a first loss capital, so that then private investors are to a certain way protected and parts of their risk if there is a first loss capital provided from the European Commission. And these measures were, let's say, focusing on the mobilization of capital and so the supply. I think another point would need to address the demand for these financing instruments, so direct capacity building support for social enterprises. And one idea could be to link these capacity development support actually to the outcomes, for example, of acceleration and incubation programs. So we could imagine that the capacity building could be linked actually to the financing that these social enterprises then obtain in the market, and that those accelerators and incubators that supported them before that actually then get rewarded for their initial efforts, and that could build a very interesting outcome-linked capacity building model. And then the third element after the supply and the demand side is actually the intermediary side. Especially if we are dealing with low financing amounts, we see that the transaction costs are disproportionately high, and it's not always economically viable for those financial intermediaries to operate in this field. So I think it's important to reduce the transaction costs for these financial intermediaries, as there is the current transaction cost support for financing around up to 500K available. I think that is also important to continue in the InvestEU. And I think it's also important to provide initial support for financial intermediaries that are willing to enter the field new. And so, for example, via the provision of patient capital for new financial intermediaries. Now, these 3 measures would address more the, let's say, the financial instrument side, are more InvestEU focused. But we would suggest that there should be more elements, especially focused on the impact side, that's then more focused on the ESF Plus side, potentially. And 2 measures could be the inclusion of impact payments. So the idea would be that the InvestEU funds could actually be leveraged to provide outcome payments for social enterprises based on the achieved social outcomes, so that by these impact payments, they can basically increase their attractiveness for the business model, and on that way then also attract more mainstream investors. And there are different elements possible how you could, let's say, design those impact payments. It could be a direct pay for a result payments that would more or less then operate like a revenue contribution for the individual social enterprises, but it could also be that it's linked to the financial instruments. So it could be an outcome-based unsecured debt that links the interest rates or the repayment of the principal to the achievements of certain outcome targets, or it could also be support of redeemable impact shares that would basically provide then the social enterprises and their investors with an opportunity to buy the shares back that they need to grant investors in the first place. So this is actually targeting social enterprise deals on the individual, so to speak, on the micro level. And the last point, outcome matching funds could be a complementary element on the macro level, and it could be an idea to leverage the ESF plus funds to actually to match fund outcome-based commissioning of either national, regional, or local or government levels that let's say should then facilitate more pay for success models that you can see in the market. So it could either be some forms of social impact bonds or also social impact incentives. So different elements to include a stronger outcome focus and outcome reward into the market. So summing up, I think InvestEU and ESF Plus really open up a great window of opportunity for all of us to, let's say, prepare the build-up of a single European market of social innovation. And I think the time is right to use that opportunity and develop jointly the appropriate measures to move the market forward and to create a better Europe for all of us. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for your presentation. I really appreciate how you presented many different and very concrete instruments to design the investment strategy underlying the multi-annual financial framework. It will be actually very exciting to see which of these instruments we'll be seeing again in practice in the next funding period. I'm sorry. So the multi-annual financial framework is clearly a very complex endeavor that requires a lot of collaboration between policymakers and practitioners on the ground. And in this webinar, we want to give a voice to both sides of the table, the institutional perspective that was presented by Bernardo and the practitioner's view that was presented by Marcus. But we also want to get the conversation going with our audience in this webinar. So let's talk a little bit about the questions that we've been receiving throughout the session. I know that my colleague Priscilla has been keeping a close eye on the questions that we've been receiving. Priscilla, what are the concerns of our audience?
There is a first question that I think it's very relevant, and I would like both speakers to address it, maybe Bernardo first and then Marcus. So the question is, with the substantial amounts of funding provided by the EU, various foundations, investors, etc., so a lot of different constituencies, is there a concern that social enterprises might grow to become reliant on grants or philanthropy money? Bernardo, do you want to give the first answer to this?
Well, I will present, what is our view, our working view in our team. We know that a number of social enterprises, they are doing very, very difficult cases. They are really working with vulnerable people, and the possibilities to obtain revenues are very limited. So we consider that in this particular situation, a number of grants and subsidies are needed. And this is checked by the authorities in charge or ourselves. On the other extreme, we have social projects with a big impact that are very good, and will be many business angels and actors will be enthusiastic to support, and all these projects will fly. Our main concern is all these projects that have a lot of potential in terms of social impact, but they need a bit of support to achieve sustainability or viability. So our approach is we assume the risk. We give you an opportunity. But this risk opportunity is that you have to work hard, you have to succeed with your project, and it is worked well, you will have a success, and you will not need any more subsidies. You are working well. If it fails, okay, the warranty is for that, because we want to assume the risk and we will give you a new opportunity. But the idea is not to create a kind of a subsidy bubble or something that is completely artificial. And the resources are quite scarce, and we are under a lot of scrutiny. So we know that whatever we do will be examined carefully, and we have to ensure that the resources that we have, that are not so much when you consider all the needs that we have in Europe, are well used.
Thank you very much, Bernardo. Maybe, Marcus, you also want to give us your perspective on this question. Do you think that there is a risk for social enterprises to become too reliant on grants and philanthropic money?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alessia. I think it's a very good question. I would comment on 2 points. So I think the first point to consider is that the majority of the money is from InvestEU will be around repayable financial instruments. So it's actually not a grant-based component, and it actually means that social enterprises might get access to some form of equity financing or debt financing, but it would in the majority of the cases imply that these social enterprises actually need to run on a sustainable business model that they can develop for 2, 3, 4 years until they reach break even, and have then at one point higher revenues than their cost, and then also can either pay back a dividend to their investors or repay a debt instrument, for example. So it's really about, let's say, the support of the build-up of sustainable business models with these financial instruments. And I think the second point to consider is that the reason why I think in the European Commission is setting up all those initiatives from the beginning is actually that social enterprises are doing some good for the society, and that there is actually a market failure. Because what we see is that the majority of the social enterprises cannot fully capture the positive external effects, as you would call it from an economic perspective, so the positive generated social impact into their business models, and that's the reason why they often can only let's say deliver sub-market rate returns. And so it's also in a certain way a compensating effort either to support them to de-risk their let's say the investment opportunity, or to increase the attractivity if you really start to pay also for the impact that they generate. So it's actually then moving the market more towards a market-based solution.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for your perspective. I think it's pretty clear that this is all the instruments really provide for a high risk first loss capital, and the objective of InvestEU is exactly to go against any type of dependency on grant funding. There is another question from the audience. This is for Bernardo. Bernardo, could you provide further details on the difference between ESF Plus and InvestEU social window? So what kind of projects would qualify for ESF Plus? Well, and on the other side, what kind of projects qualify for InvestEU? So, and what kind of projects potentially qualify?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the European Social Fund Plus is a very important proposal, and my advice is please have a check to our website and see all the eligibility criteria. But the main difference is that the European Social Fund Plus will complement all the social budget that have member states. We will provide support to the social policy of member states, is co-financing, and for projects that are normally subsidies or grants. It's non-reimbursable support. So we can have plenty of projects, education for people that is unemployed, social services for all age persons without resources, is fundamentally grants. InvestEU is completely different. InvestEU is finance, and finance that you have to pay back. And so you have to work hard for your project. Finance that is social. That means that normally nobody in the financial markets will support you because your project is too risky, or is not profitable enough, or they don't like it. The investors don't like very much social things. So, I mean, InvestEU is there to complement the market failures that Marcus was referring to. Now, there is a possibility of intersection of both. A number of projects that are difficult to put in the market, but if we provide a bit of element of a grant, that I mean we can support the fixed cost or the sunken cost or the first startup cost, can fly and can use financial instruments. So this will be a possibility of combining European Social Fund Plus and InvestEU. But this will be always attending to the different priorities in the member states. So if one member state wants to use a part of the European Social Fund Plus to have projects on InvestEU, we need to have a bilateral discussion with these member states, and we have to see what are the modalities, what is the coverage, what is the risk, what is the part of grants, what is the part of financial instruments. All this has to be fine-tuning to the needs.
Thank you very much. Thanks. And there is one more question for you, Bernardo. So someone is asking, will you propose a meeting platform for project holders or co-proposals, co-building opportunities and matching with philanthropists and corporate philanthropies? And at the same time, will you monitor open metadata as does SDG philanthropy platform in the US?
Well, there are difficult questions. First, my first reaction, of course, we follow closely what is the US philanthropy sector is well advanced. Our ambition is to do better, but not we as Commission. I mean, do better as community. I mean, all of you. I mean, we in Europe, we have a framework of cooperation. We can work for social finance, and we have to do that. Now, all the discussions about implementing instruments, you know, the Commission follows a very transparent rule. We have to have expert groups. And all the persons, all the groups advising the Commission have to be part of the process. I think we have EVPA with us. I think EVPA we will provide expertise and so on. All ideas are open now. Now we are in the phase of starting something new. So why not? I mean, also important for us is that we never go from a kind of top-down approach. We don't know better. We have to be very attentive to what is happening in reality. Marcus, maybe in Germany with Facet, knows something that we don't know, and maybe something that we cannot even expect today will change things tomorrow. So we have to be very open about the realities in the field, and all the analysis, all the metadata, and all that is very much welcome, but we need to be always have this kind of reality check with the realities in different parts of the EU.
Thank you, Bernardo. Before I hand over to Bennett for some other questions for Marcus, I actually just wanted to add two things from EVPA perspective. The first one is that indeed, as Bernardo mentioned, many of you are also asking online if they can be involved. Yes, feel free to reach out to us. We have a policy email, so it's policy@evpa.eu.com. We have been working since 2014 with DG Employment and with other DGs at the Commission to provide them with feedback on not only on the multi-annual financial framework and financial instruments, but also on other topics related to their policy work. And as many of you are asking, of course, the slides will be made available for all of you as well as the recording of this. So with this, I'm just going to pass over to Bennett for the last questions and closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. Marcus, I have one more question for you, which is, you mentioned that the European Union or the European Commission, I shall say, and I fully agree with that, has already done a lot for the social innovation sector in Europe. And I'm just curious to know what gets you personally most excited about InvestEU and ESF Plus that creates opportunity for the sector.
Well, I would say my personal excitement is mainly driven by the possibility to work together with great social entrepreneurs across Europe that have developed great and impactful solutions that where they reached a proof of concept and showed that it's successful, but that are often struggling with further scaling their solutions. And it's really that it really often harms personally to see what the opportunity costs are. So they might have developed a solution that works for 1,000 kids from neglected, let's say, backgrounds, and instead it could be scaled to 100,000 pupils, 150,000 pupils, and to support those social enterprises in finding appropriate financing to be able to scale their impact, I think is one of the key drivers for me. And that is for me personally also the key driver to make InvestEU accessible for those, let's say, types of enterprises and projects so that they can scale up their impact. That maybe regards to the question, maybe one additional comment to the discussion and that Bernardo was referring to. I think one point is important to keep in mind, that at least from my understanding, the way InvestEU shall be implemented and also how the current initiatives are implemented, it's not that individual projects are in a position to apply for funding from the European Commission. So usually the European Commission is working with an implementation partner, which has been, for example, the European Investment Fund. And then usually the implementation partner chooses specific financial intermediaries that then they, let's say, provide appropriate financing with, and then the financing into the market to the final financial social enterprises actually goes via the financial intermediaries. And I think that's also a strength now from the InvestEU, that it really tries to simplify and decrease the complexity of the current instruments.
Well, we have one more question that we've just been receiving, and it says, in France, there is a social innovation crossroads platform. I don't know if either of you is aware of that. And the question is whether there is something equivalent on European level, or if you're planning on implementing something like this on European level. Either of you? No knowledge?
I don't know it in detail, but I think that is exactly the point, that to, let's say, to get also the inspiration on these, let's say, decentralized initiatives, and to structure the financial instruments from the InvestEU so that you can also then use it for different member states initiatives. And then if you are referring to France, I think as a solidarity schemes, another great example how a member state managed to get all of us citizens actually to open the possibility to invest in social enterprises. And I think if other member states would follow that route and incorporate similar schemes like the French solidarity schemes, that would be very helpful to move the overall sector forward.
Yeah, I fully agree with Marcus. I think this aspect is very important. We have to learn about good practices, and we have to promote cross-border cooperation. We follow with a lot of interest the initiative in France, and they're very valid. I mean, and could be applied in other member states too. Yeah.
Okay, great. 1 hour has already passed. We've been talking a lot about the new multi-annual financial framework. And it's only left for me at this point to thank both of you for your availability today to discuss InvestEU and ESF+. Bernardo and Marcus, thank you both very much. Also, I would like to thank all of our participants today for tuning in and raising your questions at this very busy time at the end of the year. Just a gentle reminder that a recording of this webinar will be available on EVPA's website soon, just as the slides will be uploaded as well. So you do have the chance to revisit all the material and see if there's anything that you missed. We do appreciate you taking a moment to tell us what you think about this webinar and also future webinars in the survey that will pop up after the end of this webinar. And should you have any questions about the webinar or any policy-related matter, please don't hesitate to send us an email. Priscilla already mentioned it. Our email is policy@evpa.eu.com. And we will also be publishing a written note on the topic, so stay tuned for that. On behalf of the EVPA policy team, I wish you all the best for the remainder of this year and a calm Christmas season. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bennett. Thank you, Marcus. And thank a lot to all people that have been following this webinar.
Yes, thanks so much, all of you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.